and welcome to Celtic Connections. I'm Kathy Sinnott, and I'm coming to you from Cork in Ireland. In 2013, the Irish government passed a law that has allowed abortion in limited circumstances. And sadly, this has meant that some babies in Ireland have been aborted. But abortion advocates are not satisfied. They are determined to radically extend so-called reproductive rights across Ireland. But a major obstacle for them is written into the Irish Constitution in what is called the Eighth Amendment. And in the text of this amendment, the life of the child is recognized as having an equal right to the life of the mother. The strategy of the abortion advocates in Ireland is the same strategy that has been employed around the world. They present so-called hard cases in an attempt to erode pro-life laws. And once exceptions are made, inevitably, abortion becomes the norm. And we've seen this across the water in Great Britain, where abortion is and has for decades been practically on demand. So, what are the arguments being made to remove the Eighth Amendment, which protects babies in our Constitution? Well, these will be familiar to us. They are typically babies with life-limiting conditions, cases where the health of the mother is deemed to be at risk as opposed to the life, and in cases of incest and rape. And so the debate rages on the very biased Irish secular media, which is attempting to soften up the opinion of Irish people in order to allow for these exceptions to abortion. Now, the best way to inform everyone about these so-called hard cases is a good dose of reality. For example, when rape is presented as an exception, let's ask someone who is conceived in rape and survived abortion, not because her mother and those around her necessarily wanted her to live, but because the law in her state, the state of Michigan, at the time she was conceived, prohibited abortion. Rebecca Kiessling is an abortion survivor. She's an attorney in the U.S., and she's a wife and mother of 5 children, one of whom had a life-limiting condition and died at 33 days after birth. She's founder of international pro-life organization called Save the One, which the title refers to the hard case. And Rebecca is visiting Ireland on a speaking tour to talk about her very personal experience of so-called hard cases. Rebecca is a guest of Northern Ireland's pro-life group Precious Life, and she recently spoke at the Dublin conference, Protect and Cherish the Eighth Amendment, and this was hosted by the European Life Network and the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. So we want to thank Pat Buckley and Liam Gibson for permitting us to record the conference, and Bernie Smith for inviting Rebecca to Ireland and permitting us to broadcast this Rebecca's message for you today. Now, before we hear from Rebecca, a word of caution for parents, because what you're about to hear may not be suitable for your young children. Here's Rebecca's story.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. I was adopted nearly from birth, and like many adoptees, for years I dreamed of being able to meet my birth mother. My search began on my 18th birthday, and I was shocked to have been told that door was closed, that I would never have the opportunity to meet her. And that was very difficult for me. It was my information. So I petitioned for what's called my non-identifying information. And when it arrived, it had everything you can imagine about my birth mother except for her name. Her eye color, hair color, height, weight, age, the age of my half-brother and half-sister who were 11 and 13 when I was born, her ethnicity, religious background, occupation, educational level, detailed medical history. And I just hung on to every word. And by the way, it said that she was English, Irish, German, Dutch, and I've since done her family tree, and I did my ancestry DNA, so I really am part Irish. So it's coming back here knowing this information is just wonderful. It also had some information that was very perplexing. For my biological father, all it said was that He was Caucasian and of large build. And of course, I thought that sounds like a police description. I mean, she couldn't even say his eye color, hair color, nothing. And I thought it over. I mean, what could the possible explanation be? So I called up my caseworker and I asked her, was my mom raped? And she said, yeah. I didn't want to tell you. And I was just devastated. I remember feeling so ugly and unwanted, thinking, who would ever love me? Who's going to want to marry me and have a family with me? Because the explanation for my adopted brother, who had been in and out of jail and prison, was that socially deviant behavior is genetic. What does that mean about who I am? Do I have this ugliness lurking inside of me? If I would give birth to a son someday, would he become a rapist? And I really believe that a nice guy wouldn't want to get involved with someone like me. And then, of course, at the same time, I thought about the issue of abortion, because that's what you always hear about, right? Growing up, abortion wasn't talked about a whole lot in my family. When I was 12, my 16-year-old cousin had one, and I recall the discussions being that this was not a good thing. When I was in high school, I remember studying this issue and seeing photos of aborted babies and being horrified. But I didn't look at these images and think, oh, that could have been me. No, I thought it was just some sad story where she couldn't afford to keep me, but abortion doesn't apply to my life, I thought. And then a year after my grandfather had died, when I was about 15 years old, my grandmother just suddenly started sharing this story that when she was pregnant with my aunt, who's the younger of her two children, that my grandfather had told her to get an abortion. And she said, I never loved him again after that. And she'd say, how could they do that? How could they kill the babies? Over and over again for years. And so I learned from her that, okay, so this is definitely a bad thing. I now had a face to the issue. My aunt, who I adored, I couldn't imagine. But I figured I just won't have one. I mean, beyond that, it didn't affect my life. So I didn't give it much more thought until I turned 18, and now all of a sudden it has to do with my very survival. And it was as if I could hear the echoes of all those people who would say, I'm pro-life. Well, except in cases of rape. Or I'm pro-choice, especially in cases of rape. And I realized that all those people were talking about me, about my life. And I felt like I had at least half the world against me. I later learned from a Gallup poll that of self-professing pro-lifers in the United States, 60% make the rape exception. So I had more than half of pro-life people against me. And I felt like I was now in a position where I would have to justify my own existence. That I would have to prove myself to the world that I shouldn't have been aborted and that I was worthy of living.
This is Celtic Connections, and you're listening to Rebecca Kiessling, and Rebecca was conceived in rape. Rebecca was speaking in Dublin as part of a pro-life conference to protect the pro-life amendment of the Irish Constitution. And again, a word of caution for parents that this may not be suitable for young children. Here's Rebecca Kiessling.
One of the first things I did was to look in the phone book under Right to Life, because this is a phrase that I'd once heard. And I called a local Right to Life office because I just wanted to speak to someone who valued my life. And the woman on the other end of the phone spoke words of value into my life at a time when I was really hurting. I also asked my adoptive parents how they felt about abortion and what about in cases of rape. And my adoptive father started to say, well, I've always felt like, who am I to say what a woman can or cannot do with her own body? I guess I'd have to say I've always been pro-choice. But Dad, you watched me grow up 18 years. You really mean to say that you really believe that her body, her choice for the 8 months from the time she found out she was pregnant with me was more important than my whole entire life? Really, Dad? You really believe that? And it was like he instantly snapped out of it. And he said, no, I don't believe that. Wow, how would I ever get to a point where I would believe such a thing? And then he started to talk about how, as a professor on a liberal campus, that it was just expected that if you were progressive-minded, you would be pro-choice. But he had never stopped to consider the ramifications of that position, particularly as an adoptive father. And so I learned at 18 at a minimum that my story had the potential to change hearts and minds, but I still struggled with the big picture worldview questions of who am I? Why am I here? Who created me? What is my value, identity, and worth? And I jumped into relationships like I should be thankful that somebody would want to be with somebody like me. They became more and more controlling, then abusive, until eventually I was beat up by a boyfriend from law school. He broke my jaw. My front tooth was hanging. But I was speaking at a pregnancy center fundraiser down in Alabama, and an expert in cosmetic dentistry came up to me afterwards and offered to do all of my teeth for free as part of the Give Back a Smile program for victims of domestic violence. Well, I am very thankful for this nice new set of teeth, but let me make one thing clear. That does not make me pro-domestic violence.
Very good.
Just like being thankful for my life does not make me pro-rape. But people actually say that to me. They'll say, oh, so what you're saying is that if abortion had been legal, you wouldn't be here today. Well, you know, if your birth mother hadn't been raped, you wouldn't be here today either. So does that mean that you're pro-rape? People actually say that to me. And I explained to them that there is a huge moral difference because I did exist. And my life would have been ended because I would have been killed through a brutal abortion. I may not look the same as I did when I was 4 years old or 4 days old, yet unborn in my mother's womb, but that was still undeniably me, and I would have been killed. That is a huge moral difference. Well, in response, I'd have some people say, yeah, but that wouldn't have been you yet. Okay, well then, who would it have been? And they say, oh, well, it just wouldn't have been you yet. So I'll ask students, let me see a show of hands. How many of you here have ultrasound photos in your baby books? You don't know, ask your parents. I know I have them for my 3 biological daughters. And I ask them, and what do your parents say to you? Do they say, I don't really know what that is. Like, I don't know. It's like some kind of glob of tissue. Like, you know, I don't even know what it's doing in there. No, what do your parents say to you? They say, that was... And the students finish the sentence, and they understand that, they get it. That was me. And I tell them, and one day when you have children, you'll show them their ultrasound photos, and you'll tell them that was you. And I take my children with me to all of my ultrasounds, and they all remember, I saw you when you were in mommy's belly. And they get it. But then all of a sudden, when it comes to the issue of abortion, the same people will suddenly say, yeah, but that wouldn't have been you. Or, I don't know what that is. And it is complete intellectual dishonesty. Well, at the time I had been beat up, I had really hit rock bottom. From all outward appearances, I had so much going for me. I excelled in academics and athletics. I was attending a great law school, but I was totally deteriorating on the inside over this whole issue of value. And that is when Christ called me back to him. The first time I'd ever heard the message of the gospel, I was 15. Up to that point, I had friends who invited me to church with them, but nobody ever shared their faith with me. And then a friend invited me in high school to hear a special youth speaker who laid out the message of the gospel. Now, I had never heard this before. Trust me, Jesus is not a popular subject in a Jewish household. I was adopted and raised in a Jewish family. I went to 5 years of Hebrew school 3 days a week. I was bat mitzvahed and everything. But God was wholly irrelevant in our household. It's like people who send their kids to catechism and they don't do any of it at home. And I knew that to believe, I might as well have told my parents I joined the Nazi party. You know, this was like the greatest betrayal. But after about 9 months of attending, I no longer had a ride. I felt forsaken by my church friends, and my Jewish parents were not about to drive me. So I ended up spending some of those most difficult years of my life away from God, away from church, doing things my way and the world's way, until He called me back. And it's been amazing what God has done in my life since then. But let me take you back to when I was 18 and I first learned how I was conceived. Of course, at that point, I thought about my birth mother. And I thought, she must hate me. So I'd been told by our society. That this has absolutely got to be the worst thing that ever happened to her in her life. She's never going to want to meet me. She probably wanted to abort me. But then again, I had it all figured out that if somehow I could just meet her, and if I could hear that maybe there was some mistake, then again, I could feel good about myself and I could feel safe. Like I wouldn't have to still feel like I was a target. I didn't want to be part of that classification, conceived in rape. You know, who would? So I ended up being one of the first people in Michigan to have a judge allow my caseworker to try to contact my birth mother and see if she wanted to meet me. And it worked. I ended up receiving a beautiful letter. I ended up receiving a letter with my birth name, which was Judy Ann Miracle. So I was a miracle baby. And I thought that was kind of cool. And then it had her name, Joanne, with her phone number. Trembling, I called her up. And she told me that she was sorry to hear that I already knew. But then she proceeded to fill me on horrific details that I was totally unequipped to hear. She is 4'10", really petite. A single mom heading to the grocery store at night right down the street from her home. The guy jumped out of the bushes with a knife, abducted her, and she went on to describe for me in very graphic detail how he brutally raped her. And that's how I was conceived. And that was so hard to hear for several reasons. First of all, to think that I was conceived out of a truly worst case scenario, I just felt totally worthless. Like garbage. Because of people who would say that my life was like garbage, that I was disposable. And then I had to realize that my biological father was a really bad man. She said she had gone to several police lineups and stopped going because she wouldn't recognize his face, but that they knew that this was a serial rapist. And then all these years, I had really dreamed so much of meeting her. I had written poetry about meeting her. And so to hear that she had been violated like this really pained me. We arranged for me to fly home and meet her on her 51st birth date. And in the meantime, she sent me photos and a letter. And she wrote, "My dearest Rebecca, hoping by now that the shock of finding out all the details of your birth are forgotten. For that was not reason enough of having to give up something as beautiful as you were. Nothing as precious as a baby, mostly when you go through the 9 months and the birth all alone, feeling like no one loves you. But you were so perfect and pretty. All these years I had nothing of you, nothing saying you were part of me, just the memory of carrying a baby that I hoped one day would try to find her real mother, as I always wanted to know my baby. You were always with me in my thoughts. You were always with me in my heart, mostly in July. It seems like a lifetime, I know. When I was sick 2 years ago, I thought, I would never get to know my little girl. Would you please see if you can get me a copy of the letter you sent to the Oakland County judge? It made me cry. Also, I would like copies of your poems. These are things I would like to read. It's been a long 3 weeks. Looking forward to our meeting. I didn't know how to express my inner feelings. And then she put in caps, "It's so great, big, beautiful. It's always been my dream. I am so happy. I'm crying." And then she wrote in closing, "A love that ate at me for 19 years, my daughter at last. With love, your mom, Joanne." That was just all my dreams come true. I felt so affirmed, and I felt like, yes, I was wanted. I flew home, had a wonderful reunion weekend with her. The next day, she had a huge family reunion for me. I got to meet my half-brother, which was really weird to think we could have grown up together. 6 years later, I met my half-sister when I flew to Florida for a 5-generation photo. It was the 4th time in a row that they had 5 generations of women alive. I got to room with my grandmother at the time, which was so cool. Hear all the family stories. But after this initial reunion weekend, I flew back to college, went to a few meetings of Students for Life. I didn't get involved at that point because I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I was making horrible choices in my life. But it gave me the support and the courage I felt I needed to finally call my birth mother and ask her about abortion, because I still needed to know. And she told me the truth, that if abortion had been legal in Michigan at the time, that she would have aborted me. And I said, "Well, you don't mean if you had to do it all over again, right?" And she said, "No." "Well, what about everything you said in that letter? And what about when you were sick 2 years ago, that the only thing that kept you going was the hope that someday you'd be able to meet me? What about that? You wouldn't have had that." And her response was just, "You don't know what it was like." And I know that that's true. But I also know that today she's doing okay. She's doing great. She has a wonderful husband that she met a few years after I was born, a beautiful home. And despite the utter horror of her saying that to me, I still chose to nurture a relationship with her, to honor her for the role that she did play in my life. And frankly, I just hoped that if I could prove myself good enough, that she'd change her mind. Well, by the time she did change her mind about abortion, 6 years later, I was at a really good place in my life, now knowing my value, identity, and purpose in Christ, where I no longer needed to hear that for my own well-being, but it was still great to hear. I was with her when she was making baby clothes for my niece, who was in an unplanned pregnancy with her first great-grandchild. And she said to me, "I'm really glad she's having this baby. And I've changed my mind about all of that." 2 days later, Norma McCorvey, who is Jane Roe from Roe versus Wade, the landmark United States Supreme Court case that legalized abortion across the U.S., announced the very same thing to the nation, that she had changed her mind about abortion after years of having worked in an abortion clinic, yet never actually having had one herself. You see, by the time her case reached the United States Supreme Court, she had already given birth and placed that child for adoption. Well, how wonderful that she can change her mind and still have the opportunity to enjoy a relationship with her child from that case. But what about the millions of women since, for whom changing their mind is the very painful realization that they will never have that opportunity here on earth? Now I ask people, even pro-life leaders all across the country, all across the U.S., how many of you here know whether Norma McCorvey, Jane Roe, had a son or a daughter? And I can tell you, even pro-life leaders don't know. How could they not know? She wrote a pro-life book. I've met her. How could they not know? And how could they not talk about it if they do know? Let me tell you, she had a daughter. This is not some fictitious, theoretical, philosophical, legal entity called a fetus, but a real person, and a woman no less. We cannot let people forget that we are talking about real people, especially in the case of Roe versus Wade, especially in abortion clinics, and now especially to protect the Eighth Amendment. There are real lives who are at stake and real lives who fit the category that they are targeting. The trial date in Texas, in that case, is in a footnote of the U.S. Supreme Court's opinion. I gasped the first time I read the whole opinion when I was in law school. I was born July 22nd, 1969. I'm 47. And the trial date in Roe versus Wade was May 22nd, 1970, exactly 10 months after my birthday. The U.S. Supreme Court decision was exactly 3.5 years to my birth date, January 22nd, 1973. And so I just barely made it. And so did her daughter.
This is Celtic Connections, and you're listening to Rebecca Kiessling, and Rebecca was conceived in rape. Rebecca was speaking in Dublin as part of a pro-life conference to protect the pro-life amendment of the Irish Constitution. And again, a word of caution for parents that this may not be suitable for young children. Here's Rebecca Kiessling.
Well, this issue would come up quite a bit in law school, as you can imagine. In a room of several hundred, I would raise my hand, share a little as to how I was conceived, and explain to my classmates the truth that whenever you identify yourself as being pro-choice, or when you make that exception for rape, that what that really translates into is you being able to stand before me, look me in the eyes, and say to me, I think that your mother should have been able to abort you. That's a pretty powerful statement. And I would never say anything like that to someone. I would never say to someone, if I had my way, you'd be dead right now. That is the reality with which I live. It's like, describe for me how it's not. And I can tell you that it hurts. And it's mean, but I understand that people don't put a face to this issue. For most people, it is just a concept. And with a quick cliche, they sweep under the rug and forget about it. And I do hope that my story and the hundreds of stories now from my organization, Save the One, can all help to put faces, voices, stories to this issue. Women like me and men who were conceived in rape or incest, mothers who became pregnant by rape, who are raising their children, or birth mothers, or who miscarried and nobody understands why they're so hurt that they miscarried. Or post-abortive women from rape who regret aborting their children, who will tell you that the abortion was worse than the rape. Well, in response, I'd have people say to me, I'm not saying that I think that your mother should have aborted you. I'm just saying I think it should have been her choice. I understand that, but her choice was to abort me. You don't really know that. No, I do know that. How can you really know something like that? Well, because she told me. Well, maybe she might not have. But she said she would have. And it's like, wait a second, this thing you say you believe in, why all of a sudden standing in front of me are you so uncomfortable that you have to create this fiction in your mind that maybe she might not have in order to try to absolve yourself of any sense of responsibility? The fact is that I'm alive today. I wasn't killed because of pro-life activists, leaders, voters, legislators in Michigan who, without even knowing of my exact existence, yet recognized that mine was a life worth saving. And they did so by making sure that abortion was illegal, even in cases of rape. 100% pro-life, no exceptions, no compromise. They are my heroes. And I owe my birth to them, to the law being there to protect me. I tell people, look, if your mother chose life for you, how nice for you. But mine didn't. She chose abortion. And some of us are in need of heroes. Well, every now and then on university campuses during the question and answer period, someone will raise their hand and say to me, yeah, I just want to say that I have no problem looking you in the eyes and saying to you that I think that your mother should have been able to abort you, and I fully understand that that would mean that you'd be dead right now. Yeah, I just want to say, I have no problem doing that. Wow. Okay, well, here you go, everybody. Here's someone who, out of their care for women, that they would say such a thing to a woman like me. Can you feel the love? Because I'm not feeling it. And that's the thing, is they always talk about how much they care about women. And I challenge them, hey, I'm a woman. Now tell me, what good is my right to anything as a woman if I don't have my right to life? And they can never answer that question, because all other rights are worthless if you don't have your right to life. Well, my birth mother later shared with me that she actually went to 2 back alley abortions, and I was almost aborted. For the first, she said it was the typical back alley conditions that you hear about as to why she should have been able to safely and legally abort me. She said that the first, it was an OBGYN's office, and she had to go through the back door. And in his office, much like Gosnell's, I don't know if you heard about that in the United States, it was filthy, deplorable. There was blood and dirt all over the floor and on the tables. And those back alley conditions and the fact that it was illegal caused her to back out, as it did with most women. And then it was once again arranged for her through this network called the Jane Collective, for her to go to a second back alley abortionist that was more expensive. And she was to meet someone at night by the Detroit Institute of Arts, ironically, right next to Cézanne's thinker statue. Someone would approach her, say her name, blindfold her, put her in the back seat of a car, then take her and abort me, then blindfold her again and drop her back off. And she was told that if she was further along than they thought, or if there were any complications, they would have to keep her overnight. And again, she was terrified for her safety, but the night that she was to abort me, she was prepared to go through with it. My aunt was to drive her. She spoke with this abortion doctor on the phone. She expressed concern for her safety. He called her stupid. And she said, okay, you're going to call me names, just forget it. Well, then he went on to swear at her profusely, and she finally just hung up the phone on him. The next day, he called her back to try to once again talk her into allowing him to take my life for $500. And the same conversation took place, and she hung up the phone. I can't even tell you what it feels like to know that somebody wanted to take my life so badly, to get $500 that he would even call back the next day. I later learned that there's a documentary that is the #1 documentary used on the back alley network in the United States. It's shown in feminist studies all across the U.S. and Canada, and it's a film called Back Alley Detroit. I could watch this film and see the men who are going to take my life. I know everything about my pending death. I know the time, place, manner, how much money was on my head. For some people, their near-death experience is waking up out of a coma to find out that they were almost killed in an automobile accident. And for me, this is my life-changing near-death experience. And the fact that I was younger doesn't make it any less real or any less significant. I wasn't lucky. I was protected. Legality matters. And I am so thankful that my life was spared. But a lot of well-meaning people would say to me, you know, God really meant for you to be here. But I know that God intends for every unborn child to be given that same opportunity. And it's not like I can stand up here and say, you know, at least my life was spared and I deserved it. Millions of others didn't. I can't do that. We are called to rescue those who are being led away to death, hold back those who are staggering towards slaughter. And if you say, but we know nothing of this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay each person according to what he has done? That is a pretty strong charge, and each one of us are called to be those rescuers, those heroes for each. Now, sadly, in the United States, you may hear that there's rape exceptions in Congress, like all the time now. I'm from Michigan, where there's never been a rape exception in a single law, and Michigan has passed some of the best laws in the nation on abortion, and none of them have had rape exceptions. All the defunding bills, everything, no exceptions, because Right to Life of Michigan made a decision at their outset that they would not forsake the child conceived in rape. There's a tragic saying amongst the pro-life leadership in the United States that you save the 99 in exchange for the one. They'll say it's the burning building analogy. That wouldn't you save as many as you can while working to save all? They don't. They shut the water off, they send the fire trucks home, and they stand there watching the building burn down with the one inside of it. They never go back to save the one. We've had the Hyde Amendment in place, which is no funding for abortion under Medicaid. That's been in place for 4 decades now. Originally, there wasn't a rape exception, but for the last 22, 23 years, there's been a rape exception, and nobody goes back to close that. It's not even discussed amongst pro-life leadership. And sadly, many of them are more interested in protecting mediocre politicians than protecting the child conceived in rape. And these are all the big names in the United States. Let me tell you, it's bad. And I am so thankful for the leadership here in Ireland and in Northern Ireland who fights like their own life depends upon it. In the parable of the lost sheep, Jesus said, "See that you do not despise any of these little ones." I mean, what an odd thing to say. Who would despise little ones? Well, we get called evil seed, demon seed, rapist child, monstrous child, horrible reminder of the rape. And by the way, when do you ever hear us call, let me ask you, how many of you have heard the phrase rapist child? How often do you ever hear them called the child of a rapist, the child of a rape victim? I mean, that's the reality. And I've challenged people, why did you call me the child of a rapist? Why don't you call me a child of rape? And they'll condescendingly say, well, that is a biological truth, isn't it? Okay, well, it's also a biological truth that I'm the child of a rape victim, but you didn't say that, did you? No, you tried to demonize me by making it sound like, he owns me. We don't call Barack Obama a child of a polygamist. You wouldn't dare say that. But you demonize me. I am the child of a rape victim, and more importantly, I'm a child of God. That is my identity. So we are despised. We're targeted more than any other people group today in the world. My people group is targeted. And then Jesus went on to say, For I tell you, there are angels in heaven always look upon the face of my Father in heaven. And then he goes into the whole parable of the lost sheep, how the good shepherd leaves the 99 to save the one. And he ends this parable, which is often used to talk about people who don't know Christ, like adults who don't know Christ. But in context, he was talking about little ones who are despised. And he said, for in the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish. So he was talking about little ones who are despised, who are at risk of being killed. And he said, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish, and neither should we.
This is Celtic Connections, and you're listening to Rebecca Kiessling, and Rebecca was conceived in rape. Rebecca was speaking in Dublin as part of a pro-life conference to protect the pro-life amendment of the Irish Constitution. And again, a word of caution for parents that this may not be suitable for young children. Here's Rebecca Kiessling.
I'll just tell a couple last stories. A lot of people like to hear my Rick Perry story. He was the governor of Texas. Have any of you ever heard of him? He ran for president 4 years ago, and he also ran last year. And I'm in the Citizens United film, The Gift of Life, with Governor Mike Huckabee. Mine is one of several stories featured in this film. And so I had backstage passes to the premiere in glamorous Des Moines, Iowa. It was in between two presidential debates. And so they had 4 presidential candidates speaking at this premiere: Bachmann, Santorum, Perry, and Gingrich. And I went backstage, introduced myself to each. I told them that I'm in tonight's film. I told them I'm a national spokeswoman for personhood. And both Bachmann and Santorum said, oh, I signed the personhood pledge. I said, yes, I know. Thank you so much. It was a presidential personhood pledge. It came out 2 days before. They both signed it right away. It was no exceptions, no compromise pledge. Newt Gingrich and Governor Perry had not signed it because they were both rape exception candidates. And I gave them my DVDs, Conceived in Rape, From Worthless to Priceless, and our group DVD, Accepting Cases of Rape, 12 Stories of Survival. And my business card, Conceived in Rape, Targeted for Abortion. You know, subtle. And right away, Governor Perry was stunned. He asked me, this is your story? And I told him a little of how I was conceived and almost aborted. And he asked me, can I have your autograph? I said, no. He said, no, I mean it. And he hands me a marker and says, here, make it out to my daughter. So I wrote, 100% pro-life, Rebecca Kiessling. And then he asked me more questions, and I shared with him how I speak nationally, internationally, how as an attorney I litigated numerous high-profile cases of pro bono for free for human life, protecting human life. 2 involved rape and abortion. 1 was the frozen embryo case in Michigan, and 1 was a woman sued for not aborting for breach of contract. And I told them, about my organization, how I have a network. It's now over 400 of us with these rape-related stories, plus hundreds from our Carry to Birth division who were given a challenging prenatal diagnosis and told to abort. And he said to me, you're my heroine. Like, wow, thank you so much. But it's funny you say that, because my question for you is, would you be my hero? And I shared with him what I shared with you, how I'm alive today because of legislators who are my heroes, who protected me without exception. And I asked him again, would you be my hero? And he said, yes, I would. But you make that rape exception. And he put his head down, and he was shaking his head, and he was saying, wow, this is so powerful. This is so powerful. And he was thinking about it. And I didn't know how much time I'd have with him. Other people were waiting. And I said, I wanted to get my photo taken with you, but my battery's dead. And he said, well, I have my own personal photographer. Come with me. And we went to his green room where we took tons of pictures, which he never sent me. But he used a photo of me, him, and Governor Huckabee in one of his ad campaigns. But he kept looking at the photos, saying, I just can't imagine. I just can't imagine. And I looked up at him, and I explained that when you make that rape exception, that's like saying to me that I deserved the death penalty for the crimes of my biological father. The U.S. Supreme Court said that he didn't even deserve the death penalty. There's no death penalty for rapists, and even in a second case, they said that even for child molesters, that it's cruel and unusual punishment. And he was nodding his head. I asked him, but you believe that I, the innocent child, deserved the death penalty? And he said, no, I don't. And I'm like, well, and he stopped me and he said, you know, tonight's event and this film are supposed to be all about changing hearts and minds, and right now you're changing my heart. And I thought, well, changing? Like, what's that supposed to mean? And I had all kinds of friends on Facebook telling me they were praying for me, saying, you're going to have an Esther moment. I just know it for such a time as this. And I was not about to miss it. So I challenged him. No more rape exceptions. And he looked me in the eyes and he promised no more rape exceptions. And I thought, yes. And he went on to say that he had just never put a face to this issue before, that he had never considered it from the perspective of someone like me. He was the governor of Texas, running for president. You think he's never heard the arguments before? But it goes to show what faces, voices, and stories can do to pierce the heart in ways in which arguments cannot. The next day, he signed the personhood pledge, and so did Newt Gingrich. And then he went on national television 4 times within the next few weeks talking about our conversation, how my story pierced his heart, saying that he could not look me in the eyes and justify the rape exception any longer. So let me tell you, if you can change the heart of a governor during a presidential campaign, you can change the heart of anyone. Do not be afraid to speak up. Do not be afraid to share why it is that you would be at an event like this and why you care about protecting those whom Jesus called the least of these. Thank you.
It's difficult to write a song on the issue of abortion, but a friend of ours, Paul Kyle, has done just that, and he's done it very powerfully and thoughtfully. Here's Paul's epic song, Easy Solutions.
Well, I heard of a boy who meant well, found a butterfly trying to be. A cocoon had enfolded, entangled and scolded this prisoner bound to be free. So the boy brought relief to its hell, and then watched thinking all would be well. But the beauty just lay there like dust in the clay there, no story of glory to tell. With one wave of his hand, and one breath from his mouth, and one look from his eye, he had come. But that foolish young boy, to know better than God, stopped a life before it had begun. Well, the boy became a man who meant well, found a girl with a child by a whim, Now cocoon she was smothering, I'm too young to be mothering this new life that's forming within. So the man brought relief to this thought, and then watched the poor girl still distraught. Now no heart beats within me, what lie did you spin me? Oh God, you just tore me apart. With one wave of his hand, and one breath from his mouth, and one look from his eye, he had come. But that foolish young man, to know better than God, stopped a life before it had begun. All my life I have tried to escape, to break free from this body of sin. This cocoon which enfolds me, entangles and scolds me, this prison of mortal chagrin. I tried easy solutions to find, but they never brought me peace of mind. How I cursed and I swore, now I cry myself sore. It's my turn to step up to the light. With one wave of his hand, and one breath from his mouth, and one look from his eye, he will come. Say, you foolish old man, to know better than God, stopping life before it had begun. 'Cause I've traveled this world, seeking souls of the poor, and I think that you now must agree. There's a dead butterfly, a dead mother and child, but the poorest of all must be me. All your life you have tried to escape, to break free from this body of sin. Yes, I know you meant well, but the way down to hell, it was paved with your good intentions. You tried easy solutions to find, but they never brought you peace of mind. Now the fire has consumed all your darkness and gloom, and it's love alone that's left behind. With one wave of my hand, and one breath from my mouth, and one look from my eye, I say, come. Now your foolishness gone, come and join heaven's song, and start living, now life has begun.
You have been listening to Celtic Connections with Kathy Sinnott.